welcome to the Practical NLP Podcast with me, Andy Smith. Catch up on previous episodes at nlppod.com. And now some more ways that you can use NLP in business. First of all, changing states to change minds. Most of what we do in business is about influencing people and getting them to make the right decisions, whether it's selling so that they decide to choose your product or service, or passing interviews so that they decide it's you they're going to hire, negotiating a better price from your suppliers, getting a productive outcome from a meeting, or leading people so that they perform better than they would by themselves. The next few episodes focus on how to use NLP in meetings, negotiations, and sales. First, I want to make sure we realize something that many of those Influence with NLP and Get Anyone to Do Anything You Want courses out there don't tell you, which is the most important thing you need to know about changing people's minds. It's this: the state that your audience are in is going to have more bearing on the outcome of your meeting or presentation than any fancy language patterns or persuasion tricks you may have had up your sleeve. As the marketing guru Seth Godin says in a typically insightful piece on his blog, it's almost impossible to change people's minds when they've already decided and are determined not to change. Seth describes how he was at the airport on standby, desperately needing to make his meeting in Buffalo. When someone ahead of him in the standby queue gets a seat, he offers her $100 to give him her seat and take the next flight, which is only 90 minutes later. She turns him down without a thought, as do the next two people. He doesn't manage to get on the flight. Why weren't the other passengers open to this generous offer of getting paid $65 an hour to read a novel? Because they'd had their hopes set on getting a seat on the earlier flight for an hour, and when their name was called to say they got it, they weren't going to give that up. They'd already made their minds up. As Seth says, the same thing happens in business. There's no point at all in holding a meeting aimed at bringing about change if the people in the meeting have insulated themselves against changing their minds. And as he points out, the conference room acts as an anchor for that no-change insulated state. As soon as people walk into the room, they're reminded that this is somewhere you stand your ground, you don't back down, and you don't want to look indecisive. He suggests two ways you can combat this effect, and we can add a couple more. Firstly, pick an audience who are in the mood to flip, as he calls it, in other words, change their minds. For example, people who've just moved to a new town, started a new job, or bought a new car. This is excellent advice. Even more in the mood to flip are people who are looking to change their job or buy a new car. When I was looking to get out of a day job that I hated back in 1992, it was in IT, since you ask, I responded to an ad in a newspaper that turned out to be for a hypnotherapy course, although it was headed, "Become a Stress Auditor." It was a very expensive course. Later on I found the content was pretty terrible too, but I had no standards at all to judge by back then. But because I was definitely in the mood for a total career change, they didn't have much trouble signing me up for it. Another thing you could do is start a cascade of small flips. Robert Cialdini's excellent book, Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion, describes a psychology experiment by Friedman and Fraser in the mid-60s, which found that householders were almost 6 times as likely to agree to have a large, ugly, "Drive Safely" billboard on their front lawn if they'd earlier been asked to display a 3-inch square "Be a Safe Driver" sign in their front window. This was an example of Cialdini's consistency principle. Displaying the small sign changed the self-image of the householders. Once they put the small sign up, they started thinking of themselves as public-spirited citizens and were much more likely to agree to the larger request in order to maintain consistency with their new self-images. And we can add a couple more ideas. As we said, conference rooms tend to act as anchors for a closed, inflexible mindset. So how do we collapse that anchor, or at least give it a chance to wear off? One way might be to remind people of when they were in a more open state, when they just made or were about to make a new decision, when they first joined the company, the last time they were looking for a new car, when they moved to a new town or new country. People use examples, stories, and metaphors all the time to get their point across, so why not design some of your stories to take your audience back to a time when they were ready to make a change? And if the story has a happy ending, so much the better. If you're speaking to an audience on a training course, you could also use a quick rhetorical question, brain teaser, or physical activity to act as a pattern interrupt. For example, you could get them to try crossing their arms the opposite way to how they normally do it. This is why trainers have icebreaker exercises at the beginning of their sessions. However you do it, make sure people are in a receptive state before you start trying to persuade them. That's it for this week's podcast. Remember, you can see the show notes for this episode at nlppod.com, and you can download back episodes you may have missed from the online store at webstore.nlppod.com. See you next time.